So in fall of 2016, I was teaching at Elizabethtown College, and the Folger Library had lent Elizabethtown College their first folio Shakespeare traveling exhibit. We were the only school in Pennsylvania to have the exhibit, and so people were coming from far and wide to experience Shakespeare, right, to see Shakespeare up close. The idea was that if you were near the first folio, then you could really get a taste of Shakespeare in a way that you hadn't been able to before. I was asked by some of the staff of the library to find a way to participate in some co-programming around the first folio, around Shakespeare's work in some of my classes. And I was teaching a Bible and Race in the USA seminar and wondered what would it mean to think about Shakespeare in light of the Bible and race. And I was thinking about this on a number of levels. One was the trouble that my class had been having in exploring the notion of whiteness. And by whiteness, I don't just mean an accident, a phenotype, to quote James Baldwin, but more specifically, the embodiment of dominance and the social work that goes into convincing people that something about their person is worth more dignity, worth more respect, worth more honor than those around them. This is what we wanted to examine as whiteness, and we had trouble thinking through that, even with all the critical race theory works that had been done. We were interested to see, okay, what could we learn about sort of the textures of whiteness, how it is that such dominance is constructed. And as I was invited to participate in this Shakespeare co-programming, the idea dawned upon me to look sort of further back in history, to look beyond or before whiteness as an invention and see some of its predecessors. And you can see that in the sort of Christian dominance that's present in that play of Shakespeare's that no one likes to read, it seems, The Merchant of Venice. What would it mean to look at the embodiment of dominance as it's presented in maleness and Christianity, in counter-distinction to characters like Portia and Shylock? What would it mean to make sense of this notion of whiteness through that lens? So my students were tasked with the assignment of creating a mini documentary around The Merchant of Venice, talking with various local experts on the play, why it's not talked about, what we have to learn from it, and how its story continues to sit with us today. In so doing, I think we're able to arrive at some inklings about what it means to discuss, to explore, to study, to examine this thing we call whiteness.
I think it probably should be taught more often than it is. I know I never studied it in class. I took a good solid Shakespeare class and did not go with The Merchant of Venice. It's potentially a problematic play to teach.
It was certainly a play I was aware of, but it wasn't one that I was excited to read, or I think mostly what I had known about it was what many people say about it being anti-Semitic, or it wasn't something to get excited about. It was a play to kind of be like, oh, that's kind of Shakespeare at his worst to a degree, because it's something that we can identify with in the same way as modern readers.
I thought I had read Merchant of Venice, but I'd actually only seen the Al Pacino version of Merchant of Venice. And then I read Merchant of Venice and I'm like, ugh, this did not make me excited. I mean, it's very disconcerting because a lot of us, I think, particularly like Bardolaters like myself, tend to put Shakespeare up on a pedestal, and reading one of his plays that's not the greatest doesn't really knock him off the pedestal, but reading one of his plays that's anti-Semitic sort of is like, So it was a little upsetting for me. The characterization and of Shylock, and the dynamics between the Christian and non-Christian characters was pretty horrifying to read.
So it was only in Shakespeare's lifetime that the Bible was actually available to most people in English, just 28 years before before Shakespeare's birth, William Tyndale was actually executed for heresy for translating the Bible into English, the New Testament. He had published that first New Testament in English. So when Shakespeare quotes or alludes to the Bible, though, he most commonly quotes or alludes to the Geneva translation. So one thing that is interesting is in The Merchant of Venice, he is much more commonly referring to a different translation, the Bishop's Bible. This was printed in 1568, and it was the official translation of the Church of England. It was the translation that was read aloud in church, and Shakespeare and other people in this time period would have certainly heard this read aloud every week. Also on holidays, church attendance was required by law. You could be fined if you did not attend church, and there's apparently some records that some of his family members were fined for not attending church. Shakespeare is very unlikely to have known any Orthodox Jews. Very few of them lived in England during this time period. So when he was creating the character of Shylock, he was taking some inspiration from some of the patriarchs in the Old Testament, in particular Jacob, and there's a famous scene in the play apparently where he does tell the story of Jacob and his uncle's sheep, and using that as an excuse or as a justification for accepting interests on a loan. Also, Shylock's wife has the same name as one of Jacob's wives, Leah. It seems that The Merchant of Venice can be read as an allegory of the new Christian law versus old Jewish law.
You guys may or may not know that one of Shakespeare's contemporaries was a playwright named Christopher Marlowe. Christopher Marlowe wrote a play called The Jew of Malta. The Jew of Malta also has a daughter. He's also a moneylender. He also has a daughter who steals money and leaves him. So there's a direct contemporary parallel. Shakespeare's play is later, and Shakespeare's the one who goes further than Marlowe in making the character three-dimensional, talking about his inner thoughts. So I think Shakespeare, despite using a stereotypical other as a villain to some extent, as a complication, as an obstacle for sure to Antonio, nonetheless gives him more humanity than a great playwright, Christopher Marlowe, who would be a great playwright if Shakespeare weren't around.
What people get excited about is when you have plays where you can identify and sort of transcend all the hundreds of years between us and Shakespeare.
Your pound of flesh, here.
If you repay me not on such a day, in such a place, such sum or sums as are expressed in the condition, let the forfeit be nominated for an equal pound of your fair flesh, to be cut off and taken in what part of your body pleaseth me.
We'll leave them there for now. A pound of flesh. That's nearly half a kilogram. Modern English speakers use the phrase, a pound of flesh, when someone says they want justice, but the punishment they're asking for is so severe that it seems more like revenge.
To bait fish withal. If it will feed nothing else, it will feed my revenge. He hath disgraced me and hindered me 500,000, laughed at my losses, mocked at my gains, scorned my nation, thwarted my bargains, cooled my friends, heated mine enemies, and what's his reason? I am a Jew!
Hath not a Jew eyes?
Hath not a Jew hands, organs, senses, affections, passions, fed with the same food, hurt with the same weapons, subject to the same diseases, healed by the same means, warmed and cooled by the same winter and summer as a Christian is.
If we peck, do we not bleed?
If, If you tickle us, do we not laugh?
If you poison us, do we not die? And if you wrong us, shall we not revenge?
If we are like you and the rest, we will resemble you in that. If a Jew wrong a Christian, what is his humility? Revenge.
If a Christian wrong a Jew, what should his sufferings be? By Christian example. Why revenge?
The villainy you teach me, I will execute.
And it shall go hard. I will better the instruction.
Seen it performed a number of times, most memorably at the Illinois Shakespeare Festival, a production that was set in Germany in the 1930s. It took advantage clearly of the community's disregard for Jews. That was basically parallel in the production that we saw. It's interesting what it did. It made us certainly condemn the society more. It gave, I think, freedom to condemn the society more because the society was one that we recognized as being condemnable, if you will. The costumes from the era were used. There were spray-painted yellow swastikas. And Portia became very dark because of that. The quality of mercy is not strained, and her basic judgments of Shylock in the courtroom are condemned by the production. Not necessarily by the character at all, but the way it was staged, the way she spoke to him. She was clearly representing a mainstream way of thinking about Shylock. A mainstream, harsh, aggressive, negative, making Shylock the other with a capital O. Very much. It does raise issues that are incredibly valid for looking at that society or in our society, but when you take into context the fact that Shakespeare was a man in a society that simply didn't really know Jewish people very well, there were very few of them in England at the time of this play, that it was easy to choose the Jewish type, if you will, as a stereotyped other, capital O. I think the brilliance of the play is that Shakespeare still makes him human, that he gives him potentially a soul, although I've actually seen that topic discussed very specifically. When Shylock says, hath not a Jew eyes, and so on, he does not ever say soul. He talks about the parts of his body. He's not talking about having a soul, and there's an implication in the play, at least, that Jews might not have souls.
I think it's true that Shakespeare's characters, even his villains, often tend to be more complicated, but nobody would want to be described as a Shylock. Nobody would want to be, the associations with him is that he is evil, that he is the villain in the story, and his punishment, where he loses everything and is forced to convert to Christianity, is looked upon as a happy ending in this play.
Red hat that Jews must wear when they're outside of their area. There are the various restrictions that they have to follow, but they still get to lend money and charge interest, which is something that others in Venice were not doing at the time. We're not supposed to do. It's not considered to be Christian, as the play makes pretty clear, I think. So it's kind of practiced by allowing him to do something that's marginal, it seems to me. And by allowing him to do something that's marginal, we can still criticize that marginality, but take advantage of it when we need to, when we're pushed to do so. I think that's an interesting job, quote unquote, to let the Jewish characters have, which Jewish characters, or the job that Jewish people did in a lot of those communities in Europe at that time. So giving them something that's considered to be abhorrent is a really interesting strategy, it seems to me. I don't know that anyone ever chose that, but certainly it's what society finally did.
There are certainly some strong female characters. It is true that the Portia character is the one who ultimately traps Shylock, outwits him. She does have to dress up like a man in order to have that authority. When you take it in the context of that society, it's understandable. I mean,
in Shakespeare's theater, Portia would have been played by a boy dressed as a woman. And Sylvan Barnett has claimed, and I think she's probably right to some degree, that audiences were so habituated to this that they didn't immediately think that's a boy dressed as a woman. Just as when we only had black and white TVs, we didn't think, people aren't that color. They aren't shades of gray. And so her argument is that people would have willingly suspended any disbelief and just gone with it. But if you had a attractive Portia who was a very good actor, who commanded respect, that might have pushed the envelope even more for people to take her seriously. Him seriously, her seriously. It's complicated, as that suggests.
The stuff that Shylock gets in the last third of the play is incredibly insulting. To make someone change their religion, to then make them then feel left out of even their own community. How much further off the fringe can you push the man? Well, the final scenes of the play push him even further than he's already been. And I think he actually becomes something of a tragic figure. Something of a, I'm not saying straight tragic hero as someone like Hamlet or Macbeth, but there are aspects of tragic hero to Shylock.
For me, I think it's interesting to think about like what is tagged along with whiteness, because it's not just that it's whiteness in The Merchant of Venice because Shylock is white, if you look at it, but he's also a Jew, so it's like, what things are we tying on to whiteness that like really make you an Orthodox or really make you like the elite in a society? Because it's not just being white, because if you're white and Jewish, that's going to take you a step down. But if you're white and Christian, then you know you're above somebody who's white and Jewish, or a person like looks white. So that was interesting to me, just to see like what it means to say white, and like what privilege is tagged with looking white, but also what other things are we attributing to being white.
Yeah, going back to Portia, she was white and Christian, but she was also female, which wasn't a good attribute for that time. So she had to pretend to be a male to have that orthodoxy too, and then she could make a difference.
I mean, I thought it was interesting that in the end, all he needed to do was convert to Christianity and then like change his label from being a Jew to being a Christian, and that would have pardoned him in some ways, I guess.
I guess like larger picture-wise, looking at Shakespeare's words, they're still used today and people use them in everyday like language. So like his words are moving people as well, and like the plays are still being done.
If I had to choose my favorite lines from Shakespeare, they'd come from As You Like It. All the world's a stage and all the men and women merely players. The question for my Bible and race seminar was, who gets to define the script by which people learn their part in the world? Who gives the directions as to where people's place is in the world? By examining whiteness through The Merchant of Venice, we got a sense of all the type of work that goes into the construction of power and difference, authority and identity, and it's not something that you can just simply take for granted. They're part of a system, part of a drama that's much bigger than any individual. And so it's the systems at work that we must sort of get to the heart of. And I guess if there's anything that keeps me interested in Shakespeare, it's his ability to inspire us to give another look at the worlds by which we find ourselves playing a part. That's it for now. We'll see you next time.